ziua, bine v-am regăsit. Astăzi am bucuria de a mă afla la acest eveniment ARIR în compania a doi profesioniști. Unul este din mediul academic și altul din mediul de business, împreună cu care voi aborda pentru următoarele 30 de minute o temă provocatoare, de un interes foarte actual, de actualitate, legat de buna guvernanță în timpuri de criză. Mai precis, vom discuta despre rolul boardurilor, rolul consiliilor de administrație în crearea de valoare pentru companiile pe care le deservesc și, nu în ultimul rând, pentru comunitatea, pentru societatea în care acestea își desfășoară activitatea. So I will switch to English now. So welcome today to my distinguished guests, Professor Andrew Kakabadse and Mr. Corneliu Bodea. Andrew, you can switch off your camera. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, Andrew, and good day, Corneliu.
Good morning.
Morning.
I was just saying that today we are ambitious enough to approach a challenging topic, such as how boards can create value, particularly in times of discontinuity, in times of crisis. I would say a few words about my guests here. So Andrew is a professor of governance and strategic leadership at the UK Henley Business School, Reading University, and also is an emeritus professor at International Management Development at Cranfield University School of Management. We are proud to say that Andrew is also the chair of the board of ENVISIA Boards of Elite. And he recently completed a global study on boardroom effectiveness and governance practice, which constituted the basis of a very revolutionary program, an MA program for board practice and directorship, which we are happy to announce that will be starting in Romania in September. So Andrew is also an advisor of government, of British government, and he is one of the top 50 thinkers of the world. Corneliu. So Corneliu is a shareholder of a big group involved in energy, consists of companies active in energy industry. He is also the CEO of ADREM. Corneliu has been elected back in 2014 the president of Romanian Energy Center, which is a non-governmental organization which activates actually in energy industry and has operations in Romania and Brussels. And he's, let's say, very representative of what we call business and entrepreneurs in Romania. So I was saying that we approached today a very, let's say, ambitious topic. And since we have limited time, I dare to suggest to my guests here a sort of a nuance, more precisely to ask your views about what are the challenges for boards nowadays when they connect and deal with matters such as good governance, social issues, environmental issues. Actually, these matters are now known as ESG, but from today's perspective, let's elevate them at the board level. I will say a few words because these are now increasingly important matters, not only for investors, but also for let's say employees, for other stakeholders, customers. And what is, let's say, funny is that some of them may have different understandings. They may even use some other language. For example, we can well hear the word sustainability, CSR, corporate citizenship. What is clear is that in times of crisis, social matters actually become more important overnight, and good governance is the only way to survive. So I revert to you, and in light of, let's say, few trends which we notice on the marketplace of these issues. For example, transparency is the new normal. Reputation of the company has become a diamond asset. Employees, they do care more than ever. So business value, we can say that it is a risk. But even someone could argue those environment risks, for example, they cannot erupt overnight. But we had a recent example, and some of them they do emerge quite rapidly. So I revert to you in asking your views again, how boards can add value when the purpose of the company, the role of the company in society is a question which may not necessarily be very high on the priority list of the board. However, this question embeds lots of operational and lots of strategical issues which are quite sensitive, quite critical for long-term value creation. So, Andrew, I will stop my speech and I will let you approach this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I say, ladies and gentlemen, wishing you a wonderful day. It's a great pleasure to be here. I wish I was there in person, but this is the second best under the circumstances. The points that Adriana raised, if they're not important today, believe you me, by the end of this week, they will be. These are the critical issues that we face. How prepared are boards to handle these issues? The rough estimate from our studies is about 80% of boards are not. Now, this is a sample which goes from China to America. It's 43 countries, well over 20,000 organizations, and this is not just boards, it's the management teams, it's the general management. So it's a look at the whole of governance strategy and strategy execution. Why is this the case? Well, when we conducted a survey of the FTSE 100, 200, and 300 in the UK, we asked board members and the chairman to rate their own value on a number of criteria, and basically their scores are pretty good. Then we asked the managers to rate their own board members, and do you know that there was not one company in the UK that was fundamentally respected by its management? That's the board is respected by its management. The underrating by management was by over 40%. So if the board member said, I am 90% good at this, I don't know, strategic thinking, the manager said, well, not quite, you're about 50% good. Now, why is this the case? One is because there is a mistaken assumption about governance. All too readily, governance and compliance, governance and controls, governance and legalistic measures are put into the same category. That is simply not the case. Governance and the board is there to oversee these assets, which can call them a company, a charity, a government department, a state-owned organization. And that overseeing requires two elements. The first is compliance. Is this organization compliant with the law, with best practice, with whatever reports have emerged? The second is stewardship. What have the board members done to identify what is their unique contribution to this company at this moment in time, in this market, at this level of competitive advantage, so that we get a unique advantage? Now, the stewardship side has been problematic. Very simply, because you cannot sit in a meeting like a committee and come up with stewardship conclusions. You have to go out, you have to visit, you have to understand exactly what is happening in that organization to form a conclusion, so that you can report that back to the board and come up with a shared view as to where value really lies in the organization. The number of boards in our global studies that take stewardship seriously, believe it or not, is only about 18%. The Caterpillar Company, massive American organization, Anglo-American from the Oppenheimer tradition of South Africa, Federal Express, they really stand out. John Lewis Partnership, if you've been to London and seen that retail store, they stand out in terms of truly understanding what are the issues management face, where are the fracture points in the organization where strategy becomes deviated from its original intention. Now, those organizations have balanced mentoring with monitoring, compliance with stewardship. And the respect that I have found of the management of the board is really quite outstanding. And the reason is the board knows what it's talking about. We went back to the original survey in the UK, where basically every company was underrated by its management. What was the key reason? The board is out of touch. The board behaves like a committee. The board only looks at procedures. It does not understand the reality of what it takes to deal with the dilemmas of business. Now, these dilemmas are going to increase. Adriana talked about ESG. Anything to do with social environment, if nothing else, it's going to have a reputational impact. You do not want your company to be in the press, media, or social media as being anti-ESG, anti-social, anti-employees, and totally shareholder value. Then how you do it is the skill. So what we're likely to see in the future is a strange form of partnership developing between the board and the management team, where the board still maintains an independence to come up and make those difficult decisions, one of them being to sack the CEO. But the partnership bit is based on understanding, at least an understanding of what are the true challenges the management face in delivering strategy. And the biggest challenge the management faces is not in the creation of an appropriate strategy, it's its execution. How are we going to deliver on this strategy is a critical question. And what research says, 20% of total strategic time is focused on creating strategy, and 80% is focused on delivering on strategy. And that's why we get the term fracture points. Where does strategy go wrong? And usually it is between the corporate center and the operating businesses, the corporate center and the country structure. So the subsidiary managing directors, the country heads, their interpretation of competitive advantage in their locality is absolutely vital. And how we integrate that with a corporate center view of strategy, reputation, branding, and so on is equally vital. These relationships are fraught with tension. And when the board intervenes and assists and facilitates, does not command, it facilitates, believe you me, the respect is fantastic. One case example, Federal Express required their board members to undertake 4 international trips a year, possibly paid for by Federal Express, or if they sit on somebody else's board, they'll go overseas, but they will go to the Federal Express office in that country, in that city. I went to Singapore and I spoke to the management, and they were overjoyed that the board members were coming to see them. And the board members, by the way, come unannounced, and they demand any information, and it has to be given. So when I said to the senior manager in Singapore, is this not threatening? The response was, it's the best news I have had. I know one, I will now have my concerns will be directly linked to the board. They will not be edited out. Number 2, I trust these board members because they do deliver information as they find it. They do not tamper with it. So how do boards add value? I think only 2 issues or 3 issues you need to consider. Number 1, to what extent have you as a board member ensured that you have a meaningful stewardship role? Number 2, what are the sensitive issues that people don't like to face? And how are you going to engineer a situation where you will get people talking about things that are distinctly uncomfortable? For example, we don't like the CEO. And number 3, have you identified the fracture points in the structure of the organization? And have you made any attempt to identify what the concerns are at those points? What's the net result of that? A board that adds value, directors that add value, and why? Very simply because they are adding to competitive advantage by combining the hard bits of business with the social and environmental bits of business? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And just to make the connection to Corneliu, I will pick up a point which raised my attention. So what is important now for boards is that they will establish or at least reach a common understanding with management on what is the real significance of those issues we were discussing before, like social, environmental, governance issue for the company, but as a very practical matter with specific reference to companies' businesses, companies' activities, and ideally with an action plan. Actually, it's precisely this practicality which will enable the companies to, let's say, communicate effectively, and at the end of the day, be very authentic and credible in front of their investors. I would kindly ask Corneliu now to provide a view from, let's say, his experience, which is more toward, I mean, from a regulated industry, energy more precisely, and maybe to give a little bit of a flavor on what is happening on the Romanian market.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much, Adriana. Yes, indeed. You know, the subject, it's interesting, and given the fact that we are in the middle of a crisis, global crisis, that's a very nice subject to discuss. Now, of course, that energy companies are in the middle of this fight, and this is mainly because infrastructure now and energy supply is even more critical than it used to be in normal times. That's why I consider that also in the energy industry, boards can definitely add value and react and make sure that energy companies are performing as in normal conditions. Of course, that this crisis had an impact to the energy, and everybody already knows that the reduction in the consume was huge. In Italy, for example, was amounting for more than 30% in some period of time, which is a big threat to the infrastructure itself. Both, I mean, very, very steep increase or reduction can bring a lot of issues. Also in Romania, we will reach a level where we were something like 20% down with the consume in the mid of April. We are now slightly coming back to normal. We are still, as my information is like about 6-8% less than normal compared to the same period of last year. Now, I would bring into a discussion one thing, the fact that boards are the first representative of the shareholders. If you take it, you know, from the shareholders going down to the bottom of the organization, the first step, you meet the board. That's why the boards are the ones to be the guardians of the vision and the vision that the shareholders gave to that company. And if we stay in the energy business, I would give you an example, which is this trend in European Union mainly, but all over the globe, towards a greener energy generation. And that's an example having to do with this crisis, because having such a big decrease in energy consumption, that will probably generate less investments in the future. And this is harming the objectives for the climate change, the objective for staying in line with green energy in order to generate more from renewable resources. Boards in such times also have to make sure that the vision of the company, the direction, the general objectives, the strategic objectives are not forgotten, are staying like very important. And as soon as the crisis is over, the company will be back into following the long-term vision. Of course, there are crises strong enough in order to change or requiring a major change in the vision of the company and the strategic planning of the company. But that's also the task of the board, to be involved and to analyze this. Another thing which is critical, I think, in such times is that the board needs to build trust. And in such times, the leadership have to be the key word, and this is the word that will make the whole company to react in a good manner to the crisis. For this, you need to use a lot of communication, and that's why I think sometimes in such times the board chair have to step into the more executive position and make sure that the company reacts in a proper manner to the crisis. Now, of course, that building trust in such times is not an easy task, and I totally agree with Andrew that in order to be able to build trust and to make sure that the company reacts in a good manner to the crisis, you need to have a previous closer relationship to what is happening in the company. And unfortunately, because you mentioned Romania, what we see now in the what we used to see in energy companies, mainly the relationship between the board and the actual business and the operations is not always the best. You know, it's not always the one like Andrew described it. I'm somehow a bit satisfied that this is not only in Romania, so we can find such problems also in other places. And I think that this is one of the key learning that we have to take out of this crisis, that the board have to be more involved into the company operations in order to be able in crisis time to build trust and make sure that the company will stay okay.
Thank you, Corneliu. I wrote down some key points from your point of views, and if I am to summarize them, they sound like that: stewardship, responsibilities, sensitive issues identified and put on the table, identification of what we call fracture points, long-term vision and not at all short-term vision, particularly for the those regulated industries, which although they appear as a niche industries, they do have for our community, let's say, a tremendous value, a tremendous importance. Trust and leadership, and continuous improvement, sophisticated improvement between executive chain and board. In light of all this, and I would like to make use of those 5 minutes left, what do you think would be required from board members in terms of their preparation, in terms of their competencies, abilities, skills to be able to cope with all this? Are board members well equipped now? Is there a need of continuous preparation, study, education in this direction? And if yes, maybe you can comment a little bit on that.
Certainly. The answer to all your questions is yes. There is a need for continuous development. It may not be study in the sense of looking at books, but it is development in the sense of, are my capabilities suitable for the situation we have now? That debate now falls on the chair. And the chair is becoming even more important than the CEO, certainly from our studies and from my conclusion. And one of the things the chair has to do, and Corneliu brought it up, that getting the board involved with the management, is to draw a line. It's called delineation of duties. What is my role here as chair? What is your role as CEO? What is the role of the board here? What is the role of the management? And what we're finding is that this delineation, this line, varies. It varies over time with the same board and management team. It varies between companies, but it must be done. Once those distinctions are made, then we can see what capabilities are required from board members. Then we can see what development needs to take place. And the whole point about board appraisal is critical, because that, if it's done well, brings to the surface all those development needs that are sensitive. But it brings them to the surface through evidence, in a rational manner, and in a way that is workable for the rest of the board, rather than the chair or the CEO's opinion or the board director's opinion. So the stewardship side, which we've all been talking about, is now going to become vital. And the only way you can deal with that is to know your job here, is to get feedback continuously, and to know that the chair is in touch with both strategy, policy, and governance.
Thank you. Corneliu, do you have a point on that?
Yes, I would say that I would like to add the fact that, it's definitely very much depending on the company and the personalities, the people that form the board, the people that is involved with the executive management, the CEO. And I would bring into discussion the fact that leadership is very important. And sometimes you have the leadership capabilities in the board, inside the board, preferably at the level of the chair of the board. And then, of course, that would be a good chance for him to step in and take control, more control. But sometimes you may not find it there, and you find it with the executive management, and that might, bring a different approach depending on the company type and the type of personality and the leadership capabilities.
Thank you. We still have time. There is a question here from Hagen. It's addressed to Professor Kakabadse. If you look at non-executive directors, what do you rate as the most scarce competency for leading companies through a crisis? How would NED develop competence if at all you would find NED candidate with these competencies?
That's a very good question. And may I add, it's not just crisis. The most scarce resource as a competence or capability is when the time requires for the person to be resilient and independent. If you look at all the corporate collapses from the 1980s until last year, there is one theme running through in whichever country they occurred. One, the board members knew what the problem was. Two, they'd known it for some time. Three, they should have spoken up. They did not. Four, the culture of independence, independent perspective, and independent mindset was missing for a long time. And five, the resilience to actually create a situation where you can discuss meaningfully sensitive issues was also missing for some time. We spend too much time on some of the technical sides of a board member, which is fine. But in crisis, it is the courage to speak up in a constructive way. That's the missing factor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Corneliu, you feel like you can add, let's say, a response to that, a competence which will be key in those days for such a non-executive director to lead company through a crisis, if you are to name one, for example. And just pay attention that the question is, what do you rate as the most scarce competency? So the worst one.
Yeah, I know that it's a word that it's probably too much, people use it too much, but I would only say leadership. Leadership,
yes, thank you. I would like to close our dialogue here, and I would thank you for your contribution. We have, let's say, consumed our time spot. I would like to mention for the audience that in anticipation of, let's say, dealing with those issues, with those challenges, we at ENVISIA, we thought that we can, let's say, help the board members in their preparation for the future to be even better. And we brought in Romania, in partnership with Handley, the MA program for board practice and directors, which is a, let's say, a program which is in premiere, even internationally, and that will start in September. And we are happy that we have amongst our community professionals which actually will go through the program, and let's say will make a change and will continue to add value to their boards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Daniela, I am switching to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was great to have you at the second edition of the forum, and hopefully we will have more time next year to develop all these tools.